In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the past doctrine of Shincheonji. There are a lot of notable changes that occurred less recently, and oftentimes these changes will go unmentioned to members who join after the change, and any resources with evidence of the changes, such as articles and books, will either be quietly ignored or denounced as being the result of sabotage. One such example is the book Shintan, which Chonghuejinim recently mentioned in an article. He wrote that the content of this book Shintan was made by altering the manuscript that Chonghuejinim has written, and blamed it on betrayers. However, this is not the only book Chonghuejinim has written which current SCJ members are no longer exposed to. There are many books written in Korean which were once widely circulated within SCJ as the word from heaven, only to later be denounced for one reason or another. It seems strange that Chonghuejinim would not check the books he's publishing more carefully, considering this is essential to his duty of testifying the true doctrine to members. Surely after the first time someone sabotages a book, he would be more careful to avoid such problems. It's just something to think about, but international members may not be fully aware of the number of books Lee Man-hee has published. Often they're only exposed to the physical fulfillment of Revelation and the creation of heaven and earth, as well as perhaps a book of quotes. And even these may not be shared with new members. There are, however, many other books which have not been translated into English, but which can still give us a great insight into the potential changes to past doctrine. This Shincheonji book list was published in a book in 1997, and through it we can see just how many books were published within the first decade of Shincheonji. It's also interesting to note that that top left book is Shintan, published in 1985, and yet over a decade later it was still being promoted as the Word of God. I would have suspected that Sungsanim would be more careful and realize that his manuscript had been tampered with sooner. I wonder if his story is really true and it did take over a decade for him to realize. Or perhaps it's just a convenient excuse to take back what he had previously written. In any case, let's move on to the first topic, the image of the beast. Chonghuejinim teaches that Revelation 13 verse 15 to 16 was fulfilled in the Tabernacle Temple at 2 p.m. on the 20th of September 1981. This was a Sunday, and during the service at the Tabernacle Temple there was a pastor appointment ceremony in which 17 evangelists of the Tabernacle were appointed as pastors. Chonghuejinim teaches that these 17 people are the image set up by the beast of the earth in Revelation 13 verse 14 to 15. But what's the evidence for this claim? Well, Chonghuejinim has provided the event bulletin that was handed out at that service. On it are all the details to back up Chonghuejinim's claim. It lists Mr. O as the moderator, has the pledge the evangelists made in order to become Presbyterian pastors, and lists all 17 names of those making the pledge. This is the 3-page event bulletin as taken from the book Development of Shincheonji, published in 1997. The first page translates to date and time, 1981, September 20th, 2 p.m. Place, Isaac Central Church, and then lists the 17 names of the evangelists taking the oath to become pastors. On page 2, it gives the proceedings of the service, as well as the oath the evangelists must take, which leads on to page 3. In the middle of page 3, it again lists the 17 names of the evangelists taking the oath, before continuing with the ending of the proceedings. And here I've taken those 17 names and made it a bit easier to see. Note the 2 names in yellow. Even if you can't read Korean, just try and remember the shape of the characters, and we'll see something interesting about them as we go along. We can find a similar event bulletin in the latest edition of the book Religious World's Interest. The content is practically the same as the 3-page bulletin, but this time it seems that there's only 1 page. It's a bit strange because I thought that it was meant to be a photocopy of the bulletin in order to be used as evidence. But I guess we can let it slide. I mean, it seems the 3 pages were made to be more organized, even though they were published sooner and this is the one published later. That's a bit strange. But it still has the same date, event proceedings, the oath for the evangelists, and the names of the 17 evangelists, even though the names order is a little bit different. Well, surely this is the original photocopy, right? Well, maybe not. If we look at an earlier copy of Religious World's Interest, the first edition, there's actually a significant difference in the event bulletin. There are only 15 names in the pastor appointment ceremony. Those 2 names in yellow are missing. Then which copy was the real event bulletin that Chunghaejnim received during the service on 1981, September 20th? Is it more likely it was the original, published in the first edition of the Religious World's Interest? Or was it the one published in later editions of Religious World's Interest? Surely it would be the one published first, right? And if the 15 names are just a mistake, how did that mistake even happen? It's meant to be a photocopy, to use it as evidence. But in all 3 instances, the bulletin is different, and in the earliest publication, there's only 15 names. At minimum, this shows that Chunghaejnim's evidence of the event bulletin for his story of what happened on September 20th, 1981, cannot be trusted as evidence. On the other end of the scale, one could also argue that this change from 15 pastors to 17 shows that Chunghaejnim is being intentionally misleading and fabricating evidence for the claims he makes. But, of course, one could also argue that the number of pastors does not matter, as long as there were pastors appointed to fulfill the role of the image of the beast. This avoids the problem of Chunghaejnim potentially lying to his congregation, but as we'll see in the next topic, it doesn't solve all our problems. This next topic is the beast of the earth. Now, who is the reality of the beast of the earth in Revelation 13, verse 11? If you're a particularly diligent SCJ member, you might have thought of question 49 of the examination to put the new covenant we must keep into action. In it, it asks, who is the beast of the earth's actual entity? And the answer is O blank Ho. The reality of the beast of the earth is said to be Mr. O, full name O Pyong Ho. But if we look at the book Revelation's Reality, published in December 1985, it says that the beast of the earth is one of the 17 evangelists turned pastors. The translation is, and by having one of the 17 new pastors stand on the pulpit as a representative to give a benediction, the young beast that was ordained by the beast was brought up from the earth to the platform. And on page 22, the translation is, it is a question of why all the 17 new pastors became beasts, but only the pastor who gave the benediction on that day was called the beast that came up from the earth. As we can see, it says that one of the 17 evangelists is the beast of the earth, but O Pyong Ho is not one of the 17 evangelists. We can check the 17 names above and confirm this. So who is the beast of the earth in this book? It says it was the pastor who gave the prayer of benediction. So let's look at the ceremony paper to see who this is. The translation is benediction ... appointed pastor ... Pastor Lee Cho-ju. So as we can see, Chunghaejnim was teaching in 1985 that Lee Cho-ju was the beast of the earth. But now he has changed the fulfillment and is teaching that O Pyong Ho is the beast of the earth. It seems like a good time to remember Revelation 22, verse 18 to 19. A quick note on the translation: if you've got any questions, I would advise you to have a look at the document in the description. It has some more details about the translation, particularly about benediction, and how we can use this to confirm the translation that's been used. The next topic we'll look at is the 3.5 days the 2 witnesses are dead. In Revelation 11 verse 9 and Revelation 11 verse 11, it mentions 3.5 days in which the 2 witnesses are dead and denied burial. What could the reality of these 3.5 days be? Well, let's take a look at what Chunghaejnim wrote in Revelation's Reality, published in 1985, to find the answer. This excerpt from page 167 translates to say the 3.5 days suggested in the text means 3.5 years, the sum of the actual sentences received by the 2 witnesses and the probation period. In this excerpt from page 165, it translates to say, as already recorded, the 2 witnesses were detained by the prosecution and sentenced to 100 days in prison. One thing we need to understand here is the passage about preventing the burial of his body for 3.5 days. In conclusion, prohibiting the burial of the bodies of the 2 witnesses does not mean killing their bodies or imprisoning them in a brigade for 3.5 years, equivalent to 3.5 days. Since the two witnesses were detained at the protests that year, they began and finished their witnesses. In effect, a year passed. And this excerpt from page 166 translates to say, he was released in February of the following year. However, when released, the sentence was suspended for 2.5 years, and the period of disciplinary action reached 3.5 years. Also, the word killed does not mean physical death, and the suspension was given so that he could not testify to the word, so he ended up in a dead position. In other words, the word is life. The fact that the missionary who had to bear witness to this word of life became unable to do the work was virtually the same as losing his life. From these excerpts, we can see that Chung Hui-Jinim saying that the two witnesses dying is not them physically being killed or even being imprisoned for 3.5 years. Instead, Chung Hui-Jinim explains that the two witnesses were imprisoned for 100 days, followed by 2.5 years of probation, during which they couldn't testify the word, making them effectively dead. However, because they were imprisoned near the end of the year, it was the next year by the time they were released on probation, so Chung Hui-Jinim says this counts as a year. Then it's clear to see that 1 year plus 2.5 years is equal to 3.5 years, and those 3.5 years are the fulfillment of the 3.5 days in Revelation 11. This is summarized on page 167, where it translates to say, the 3.5 days suggested in the text means 3.5 years, the sum of the actual sentences received by the two witnesses and the probation period. Then let's take a look at the current doctrine regarding the 3.5 days in Revelation 11. If Chung Hui-Jinim received the complete understanding of Revelation like he claims, it should still be the same, right? Especially since both these teachings, from 1985 and today, are after the fulfillment has taken place, meaning the prophecy has been unlocked. The screenshot is taken from the Revelation 11 lecture published on YouTube by Shincheonji. Interestingly, it states that the reality of the 3.5 days was actually 3.5 days, from the 30th of January 1981 to the 2nd of February 1981, rather than the 3.5 years taught in 1985. But perhaps this tribe leader made a mistake. Let's take a look at what Chung Hui-Jinim himself wrote in the book Physical Fulfillment of Revelation, page 245. It too says the two witnesses remain dead for 3.5 days. This is a specific and literal length of time. Well, then it would seem that Chung Hui-Jinim has changed his explanation, and the tribe leader wasn't mistaken. Why would it change from 3.5 years to 3.5 days? The next topic is the 7,000 killed in Revelation 11 verse 13. These people are killed in an earthquake, and the survivors were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. So what does this mean? Let's once again turn to Revelation's reality, published in 1985, to see Chung Hui-Jinim's explanation. An excerpt from page 171 translates to say, now the meaning of the number 7,000 is as follows. The 7 shepherds and the 10 elders united, gathered their counsel and wisdom, and did their best, but in the end they collapsed when the time came. This relationship can be explained as an equation as follows. 7 shepherd times 10 elders times 100 full of wisdom equals 7,000 Babylon. And he goes on to say, when an organization or individual sets a goal and fully achieves it, it is expressed as 100% achieved. This means that everything has been accomplished. Thus, 7,000 is obtained by multiplying the number by 100. So Chung Hui-Jinim explains that the 7,000 killed in an earthquake is symbolic of the leaders of the Tabernacle Temple. There were originally 12 elders, but 2 of those left, resulting in only 10 elders remaining. So the 7 lampstands and the 10 elders, not achieving their goal because they betrayed, is all multiplied together to result in this 7,000 number. Have you ever heard this explanation? I'd be very surprised if you have, because let's take a look at what's being taught today and see if it's the same thing. This screenshot is taken from the Revelation 11 lecture published on YouTube by Shincheonji, and here it says that the 7,000 people killed are the congregation members of the 7 golden lampstands. So what happened to that equation with the leaders and the 100%? Maybe the explanation is still the same in Chung Hui-Jinim's new book, Physical Fulfillment of Revelation. Let's take a look at page 247. Here it says, the great city that collapses because of this earthquake is the tabernacle of the 7 golden lampstands that has already become a church of the beast. The 7,000 people who die are people of the outer courtyard, which has been given to the Gentiles for 42 months. These are also the people of the tabernacle that betrayed. It seems like Chonghuejinim has changed his explanation for the 7,000 killed in an earthquake too. Now he says that it refers to the congregation of the tabernacle of the 7 golden lampstands, but that's completely different to the equation with the leaders not achieving 100% that he gave previously in the 1985 book. Does it make sense for someone who's received the complete understanding of revelation from God to change their testimony? Well, maybe that will be easy to answer after we take a look at the next topic, a reed like a measuring rod. In Revelation 11 verse 1, John is given a reed like a measuring rod and told to measure the temple of God and the altar and to count the worshippers there. I'm sure everyone who's a member of Shincheonji knows the reality of this reed like a measuring rod. But let's take a look at what Chonghuejinim writes in the physical fulfillment of Revelation, pages 229 to 230, just to confirm. It says, the reed like a measuring rod in this passage is a person who has weak faith, like John the Baptist had when he doubted Jesus. It also refers to a person from the tabernacle of the 7 golden lampstands, on whom John depends and with whom he works. He is a spiritual partner like Eve, whom God gave to Adam, and like Aaron, whom God gave to Moses. So I assume you are already familiar with this, but Chonghuejinim teaches that the reed like a measuring rod was the second witness, Mr. Hong. So let's compare this with what Chonghuejinim wrote in Revelation's Reality from 1985 and see if the reed like a measuring rod has always been the second witness. This excerpt from page 155 translates to, Apostle John received and ate the little book in chapter 10. This time he receives a reed like a measuring rod. Receiving the little book and receiving the measuring rod and reeds are related, and they are both words from God. Here, Chonghuejinim says that the reed like a measuring rod is the word from God, similar to the open scroll in Revelation 10. Considering the teaching today, it would be wrong to say the reed like a measuring rod was the word from God, because the nature of the reed is that it's weak and cannot be relied upon. But this is exactly what Chonghuejinim taught back in 1985. With all the previous changes in mind, we should once again consider Revelation 22 verse 18 to 19, and question why the testimony of someone who received the complete understanding of Revelation and saw and heard the physical fulfillment of all the events of the entire book of Revelation would ever change. I certainly hope that these videos have at least helped you to ask that question. But if you're wondering what the next step is, I would encourage you to watch the next video on the alternative to Shincheonji.